Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another insightful episode of Critical Conversations with the Compass Foundation. I'm Chris Hussain.
I am Shanta Sikpasad.
I'm Narmada Ramjit Singh.
Today we delve into two critical topics affecting the nation: the tragic Paria divers incident and, of course, the escalating cyber threats in Trinidad and Tobago. We are joined by a very distinguished guest, the Member of Parliament for Mayaro and the Shadow Minister of Trade and Industry, the Honorable Mr. Rushton Paray. And I know Mr. Paray would bring he has a wealth of experience to these particular questions and this interview, and you'll see as we develop it. As you all know, the Paria divers tragedy, a painful chapter in our history in Trinidad and Tobago, has prompted a commission of inquiry revealing systematic failures and sparking a call for accountability. Of course, simultaneously, our nation grapples with an increasing wave of cyber attacks, jeopardizing our data and, of course, our security. Tonight, we seek not only to understand these critical issues, but to explore tangible solutions and demand transparency from our leadership as we, the citizens, seek to have a better Trinidad and Tobago. So, Mr. Paray, I know you're a very tech-savvy representative with a finger on the pulse of Mayaro and a passion for shaping Trinidad and Tobago. And of course, I know not just Trinidad and Tobago, but you speak a lot about the youth. So we want to thank you for joining us today on the Compass Foundation on Critical Conversations.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Now, Mr. Paray, when we looked and we reflect on this report, this commission of inquiry that has been made public, and I know that for the past couple of days, we are trying our best to digest and navigate this document. Of course, I want to get to the safety and the protocols and of course the recommendations. Given the Paria divers tragedy and the Commission of Inquiry's recommendations, what safety protocols and procedures typical in the energy sector do you consider crucial to prevent such a disaster and such an incident like this?
Well, first of all, right, the recommendations that were made on the report itself, when you go through all 50 odd recommendations, they all speak to various components of the industrial safety requirements, communications, corporate behavior, and so on. They are all good recommendations. Now, in the energy sector, you have to understand what defines risk, right? There's something called a risk matrix, where you look at an incident, you look at the probability of occurrence and the impact. So it is physically impossible for you to prepare for every single event under the umbrella that you think could happen when you go and do a job. When you're planning for the job and you look at the risk matrix, obviously you are going to prepare for the ones that has the higher probability of occurrence. So for instance, I live in Mayaro. I live on the coastline. If I have to do a safety matrix for where my house and my business is, I would look at certain incidents. Flooding. Flooding is a high occurrence, high impact. I will prepare for that. Hurricanes. It's high impact, middle or medium level in terms of its occurrence, and high cost impact. On the coastline, a tsunami. That is something has high impact, high cost, but terribly low risk. Because if you look at the last 100 years, we have not had an instance of tsunami, well, that is even recorded for Trinidad and Tobago. So while all are risks, we will not prepare to deal with a tsunami in a way that the cost to do the preparation. So you find what happens now, you may have one drill happen for the year that the regional corporation would normally do for the area. So if we come back to the energy sector, all jobs, there are risks involved in all jobs. So they have some standard assessment that you do, job safety analysis, a hazard analysis. You must have someone who is a performing authority, which must be an expert in that area that you're going to do the job, who would have a bird's eye view on what you're doing. And then obviously in the whole area of safety, every single person in an area where a job is happening is a safety person. Anybody from the cleaner could shut a job down. If the cleaner in an operation see that there is a safety risk and he identifies it as a performing authority, that job can be shut down. Now this is where my challenge is with the experience that we have in the energy sector, is that one size cannot fit all. So for instance, a JSA or hazard analysis for one of my technicians climbing an electricity pole that has a low voltage line cannot be the same assessment for a TNTech engineer who is climbing a rig with high voltage 440 voltage lines. You cannot use the same tools in terms of the same analysis for both jobs. What I find in the sector today is that safety departments are all run via what you call a rudimentary best practice. So a safety officer comes on a job site, he checks 8, 9, 10, check the box, everybody check the box. We talk about a toolbox meeting where we talk about the job and then sign off and you go do it. In this instance with Paria, from the first time we started to speak about the Paria incident, and during the investigation, when the Commission of Enquiry started, one thing that I recognized that was not done, looking at the type of job and the risk of the job, a paper process could not have worked. So they depended on a paper process with GSA's health analysis, some rudimentary paperwork. To me, for the type of job and the risk involved with divers, pipeline, a bell, to me, this is what should have happened. All the players should have sat in a room a day or two before, or even a week before, and item by item, each participant should have walked through what we're going to do. And when I say the participants, I'm talking about the Paria folks, the diving company, who are the support people in the event of a disaster, fire, TRT, Coast Guard. All of them should have been in a room, and we're going to walk through what we're going to do today. And not only the folks who were doing the diving job, every single activity that was happening on that pipeline on the same day, they all should have been in the same room. So when we decide, all right, let's walk through from hour number 1, this is what I'm going to be doing. So somewhere along the line, if an event is being described, a player could say, hey, I will be doing something on that line at that same time, and we need to be careful. So nowhere in the investigation during the committee inquiry can I recall, or not, I didn't even read it in the commission's report, where that type of analysis was done. So I think Paria got caught in this paper process. So there were, if you look at all the recommendations looked at 4 important areas. And they did pretty good with the recommendations. The first area that I observe is that they scrutinized the industry weaknesses and they made recommendations to strengthen it. And this is the diving industry. They look specifically at the fact that we are an unregulated industry in Trinidad and Tobago. Basically, men do what they want. There are no standards, there are no governing guidelines to follow. So they were very, very strict to that in terms that the government must bring the relevant legislation to Parliament to strengthen the industry, that diving industry, be it pleasure, be it commercial, be it industrial. The other area that they looked at was the permitting system. And this is why I felt the recommendations were a bit weaker. They continued to talk about strengthening the paper process. I have no problem with the paper process, but it cannot be one size fits all. These jobs, these high-risk jobs, cannot depend on paper processes alone, or it should not depend on paper processes. They should have a lot of sit-downs, they must have a lot of walkthroughs in terms of this is what we're going to do, and make it part of the procedure. Now, they did talk about, strengthening some of those things, but I think those things would need to be developed more clearly going forward in the industry. Now, they focus on Paria. Now, I can tell you, just recently I traveled abroad on some business for the companies that I work for. And I can tell you there was a huge amount of interest in what the commission's report would be. Because this incident, it drew a lot of attention for companies, energy companies all over the world, diving companies all over the world. So they were looking carefully at what the report would say and how the state will be handling it. Because remember, we have to ensure as well that our laws that regulate operations meet international standards, because it impacts our trade and investment portfolio at the end of the day. We have companies interested in developing a hydrogen facility in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, if these companies feel that our legislation is too weak, our safety practices are too weak, our OSHA regulations are too weak to protect their investment in Trinidad and Tobago, they may think otherwise, or they may find other places to invest their money. So that is how important these recommendations are, and that the state acts on it. The third thing that I felt that the report looked clearly at was communications during the incident. The report was very, very, very harsh on Paria in terms of their communication, their incident communication, their incident command system, which collapsed totally. So the report made several recommendations on strengthening that incident command team, that system, and obviously the communication. And communication not only with the country, but with the families of the victim. I think the commissioner himself, Mr. Lynch, he came down like a ton of bricks on Paria, and that the communications with the family was poor, in that you couldn't be speaking to these people by a gate, and their loved ones are stuck in a pipeline. I think that was inhumane, incompassionate, and I think Mr. Lynch came very, very hard, and he put recommendations inside there that we must strengthen that type of communications, more so in dealing with the families of victims who may be injured or maimed or captured, in any type of event. And obviously the last piece where the component of the reporting was in terms of the suggestion of criminal negligence on Paria and compensation for the families. They were very, very strong on those two areas. So what happens next is really up to the state. My gut feeling is that while we do not have legislation for corporate manslaughter in our books here in Trinidad and Tobago, there is some common law principle that can be used to bring Paria as a corporate entity on a particular charge. But you know what is the charge? What's the fine? $5,000. So basically, if they get to that position, Paria may be liable to pay about $25,000 in fines on a charge like that as a corporate entity. So the Commission of Inquiry costs about $20 million. The fines may be about $25,000, and not a family member of any victim have received $1 on this matter. And the last item on that, I really think that the state could instruct the board, pay these people some money. There has been some recommendations in terms of where the liability is, in terms of the compensation, but do not allow these families to go back to the court to have to fight for compensation. Relive the experience, because when you go before the courts, you have to relive an experience. And I think it is only right that the state do not allow these family members to relive that experience of the Commission of Inquiry and sit with these families, negotiate a settlement, and pay them, and let's move on. Let's spend the money in fixing the industry, strengthening our management system of incidents, and put it across the board, whether you're a state enterprise or private enterprise. Look at best practice and let us make sure we never have this incident happen again.
MP Paray, unfortunately, industrial accidents have become frequent. This past year alone, we had a WASA employee was buried alive on site, TNTech workers stung by bees, and an explosion at Petrotrin Naikwan, which resulted in another death. How do you believe government should address these accidents, and what improvements can be made in our approach to safety in state entities?
So, all of these incidents, I would equate it the same way how we are having this expansion in criminality in Trinidad and Tobago. And I have also maintained, if we want to clamp down on crime in Trinidad and Tobago, while we can put legislation, we can put technology, if we don't reach to a point of swift justice as a deterrent, we will not attack the problem of crime in this country. Criminals must know that within 90 days of being caught of any offense, you could be behind bars. Those who are entrusted with the protection of our citizens, police, judicial officers, prison guards, if they know that their actions can be brought before the courts within 90 days and swift justice could get them in jail, they will not conduct themselves in a manner that brings their organization into disrepute. It comes back to corporate Trinidad and Tobago, WASA, TNTech, Paria, even private sector enterprises. We do not have a history of criminal charges via negligence. Now, we need to strengthen our laws in this country and make sure corporate entities understand that their board of directors, their managers, their CEOs can be held criminally liable when certain events happen, when negligence can be proven. Now, I In 1995, I think there was an amendment to the Corporations Act where long ago, as a sole trader, you went into debt or something happened, you could have been sued for your house, your land, your car, whatever. With the formation of limited liability companies, you could have only been liable to the value of the company shares or what the company owns. Now, sometime in 1995, there was an amendment to the Incorporation Act which made directors fiduciarily responsible for the debt of companies. So it means that CEOs, directors, if they were to make bad financial decisions, they could have been held personally liable. So your house, your car, your land could have been seized in a court matter. So it really allowed directors of companies to be more prudent in their decision making when making financial decisions. So I'm saying, if we ought to put some time and strengthen our corporate law in terms of criminal negligence, I think CEOs, boards of directors would be very, very, very cautious, very, very interested in ensuring that all safety protocols are adhered to when jobs are happening within their organizations. And it will not be a paper process with a bunch of check boxes that you tick. You know, it's like ticking boxes. Yes, we've done that, and you move on without any real concern that I can be held liable if an injury happens on this site. So I pay more what I call eagle attention. Every single item I would make sure, as a performing authority, as someone who is responsible for the job site, everybody has to be on their P and the Qs. So let's strengthen the laws. Let's strengthen the laws that makes corporate Trinidad and Tobago more responsible in terms of making sure that there is no injuries. Now, would accidents occur? Absolutely. There will always be the unguarded moment when something would happen. But planning minimize risk. That is how it works in the insurance industry. If you plan, you will minimize the risk. My father always says, listen, drive at a reasonable speed. So even if the fool on the other side of the road is being reckless and you come into contact, you may be able to walk away with minimal injuries because you are reducing the risk by maintaining your speed, maintaining your side of the road. So I'm saying, let us reduce the risk. Let's put the relevant laws into place that will make corporate Trinidad and Tobago more responsible. And as I said, if there is swift justice, then everybody will be doing what they ought to be doing to make sure we save lives at the end of the day. Look, before I finish this point, I have had occasions when I'm going home after Parliament and I pass through some roadblocks. I will see police officers in the night with no bulletproof vest on. On one occasion, I had cause to stop. They stopped me and I asked to speak to the officer in charge. And I told them that, I was so happy to see them out on the road doing their jobs. But, I have a concern. Why are these officers without their bulletproof vest? And I mean, he gave some excuses and so on, which I would not go into. But I am saying, you want to go home to your family at the end of the day. And you too, the employee, have a responsibility to follow the rules as well. No police officer should be on a roadblock without a bulletproof vest on. More so now in an era where we have so much of high-powered assault rifles, assault weapons that are being used. I mean, I don't want police officers being sitting ducks on a junction in a roadblock. So again, swift justice, improving the laws to make corporate manslaughter something real and to cause corporate Trinidad and Tobago to pay more attention to the safety requirements, to the life and limbs of their employees at the end of the day.
MP Paray, we have seen your calls for the removal of the Paria board. However, 1 week has passed since this inquiry report was laid in Parliament, yet the board was not removed. Why do you think this is occurring? Why haven't they taken swift action to remove the board?
Well, I mean, I can't answer as to why they have not been removed or why nobody has been fired. What I can tell you is that in TSTT, some data was leaked on the internet, and we had the head of the CEO within 2 days. You had the financial officer of TSTT. His head was on a block in a couple of days as well. But we lost 4 lives in Paria, and nobody has walked. Nobody has been given their marching ticket. And forget that for a second. Not one of them has the decency to say, you know what, I am offering my resignation. We lost 4 lives. We made a terrible mistake. We mishandled certain things. And you know what? I am going to walk. We don't have that culture in this country. We don't have it politically. We don't have it culturally. We don't have it corporate-wise of people walking when these missteps are made. And you just have to juxtapose TSTT and Paria. 2 heads roll. Nobody has role at Paria. But you know what? Paria as a state enterprise. This is what I find difficult. When you look at the recommendations and you look at how things were handled, things that were not done, right? All of these things to prepare. Now, safety is a high-cost item. Let me tell you this. In business, safety is a high-cost item. Companies, when you ask companies to start cutting back on costs, some of them, the first thing they look to do is, hey, let's cut back on some safety training, safety awareness, because these things are costs that you put out in the possibility of an event. So it's an easy target for the cost-cutting exercise. But you know, strangely enough, Paria has declared profits, substantial profits every year. So I'm wondering if these profits are being declared at the expense of lives in Paria. And that is something I hope that at a joint select committee, at one of those PACs, that they'll be able to scrutinize the financial reports and look at the spending over the years since Paria was formed in health and safety and see what the spending, has it increased, has it decreased? Because companies, as I said, safety is really a high cost item. When you look at, a couple of things that, were mentioned in the report, if companies ought to do those things, it will carry their cost up. It's going to hit their bottom line. But, it comes back to this saying, what is the cost of a life? What is the price you would pay for a life? So Mayaro has no fire engine right now again. It has gone for repairs 1 week. A car caught a fire last night. This is last night, which is Thursday night, in front of a business place. It took Rio Claro 45 minutes to get the fire engine to Mayaro. But if that car was closer to the business place, one of the largest supermarkets in Mayaro, that entire building could have been engulfed in flames before the fire engine came. But you know what's the response of the state? Is that one fire engine in Rio Claro is sufficient to service Mayaro, to service Beach, and if they need help, they'll get help from Sandy Grande and Princestown. Now, that is ridiculous, that is nonsensical, because what is the price of one life versus getting a fire engine for Mayaro? And that's the question that we must ask. So, that is where we are in terms of, Paria and what they ought to be doing. But I suspect the public pressure has to come down on Paria and the state. Public pressure, I saw there was a bit of as MP Lee said, it was not protest, but it was a highlighting of the concerns of the families of the Paria divers yesterday in Pointe-à-Pierre. And I hope the messaging reached the state and reached Paria board based on that yesterday.
MP Paray, this has been the worst industrial accidents in 40 years in Trinidad and Tobago, and there has been no accountability. The Prime Minister has offered no comment on the Commission of Inquiry report. How vital is it for political leaders to openly communicate with the public in situations like the Paria tragedy? And what impact does the lack of transparency have on public perception?
Well, open communication is important not only in government, in politics, it's important in families as well. Open conversation, open ideas, if you want the country to understand where we at, you have to be open about it. Now, the Prime Minister's silence on this matter is not strange to me. He has been silent on many other matters. When you go back to even, the reports in Naikwan, you have had reports on a number of other things. The Prime Minister normally remains very, very silent on these matters. But what we as a people, what are we doing? We are going to be involved in carnival festivities over the next week or two. And hundreds of thousands of revelers will be on the road. And that is fine. I have no problem. It's part of our culture. But we can't find 1,000 people to go to Port of Spain to demand that the Prime Minister does something on Paria or makes a comment on the report. I think sometimes our priorities are in the wrong place. Political organizations also must be open to scrutiny. It must be open to answering questions and delivering the answers honestly at the end of the day. That's a cultural thing. Are we accustomed to that in Trinidad and Tobago? No. Is it so in other jurisdictions? Yes, if you look at the British parliamentary system, if you look at what happens in other jurisdictions, you have people who, they step aside. Most recently, when you had the Deepwater Horizon incident, the BP incident, Mr. Tony Hayward walked. Just the other day when the Boeing 737 MAX 8, the two planes that crashed because of bad software, the CEO of Boeing walked. Now, you don't have to tell these people to do these things. That's a cultural thing. We have to develop that in Trinidad and Tobago. That is not something that has been part of our culture. And I don't know how we can adopt it, but we are a young, independent nation. And as we grow older, I think some of these things as our nation, as the people, becomes more exposed to what the rest of the world is doing, they're going to demand more of their leaders. And I think we're probably a generation away from that. Hopefully my children or their children will be able to demand action from their leaders. There's an old saying is that, you must be governments must fear their people. People mustn't fear governments. But when we remain quiet, when we remain silent on matters, governments tend to run away or run rampant with foolishness. And this is what you see happening with this administration. Nobody's questioning them. Yes, there's 19 of us in the parliament, in the opposition. There's only so much in terms of what we can do that is well within the law. You need to have the country behind you. You need to have reasonable, well-minded thinking people to stand with loud voices to demand certain things, and that is not happening. So, as I said, I hope that we get to that point where we can demand answers from our leadership at some point in time.
MP Paray, so we have seen the DPP has received the Paria Enquiry report. Now, considering the past history or tensions between the Prime Minister and the office of the DPP, do you think, especially when we look at the head of Paria as well, do you think there may be any political interference to delay legal proceedings?
There is always political interference in everything in this country. There is political interference in every action. Would I say that the DPP can be influenced by political interference? I will not be so bold to say that the Honorable DPP is subjected to that. But what I can say, that the DPP has the power to act on his own merit. The DPP has the power or had the power during the investigation, during the commission of inquiry. He has the power during testimony in his own mind, see criminal negligence and charge somebody. He didn't have to wait on a commissioner of reporting. The DPP has the power to listen during any investigation, any commission of inquiry. And if there is negligence, criminal negligence, being spoken about during the investigation, he could lay a charge. So he has the power. He has tremendous power under the Constitution. So he don't have to wait on a report to decide if there is a charge that can be laid. Right? So, I mean, I trust that the DPP, I have seen him in action at joint select committees. I will give him the benefit of the doubt as that he's an honorable man. And in his deliberate judgment, if he sees that there is enough substantive evidence to bring criminal charges against anyone, I suspect that he will do so. Remember, you have to take people before the courts when you charge them, and you must be beyond a reasonable doubt. And if the DPP, in his thinking, feels that what is before him is not sufficient to bring a charge or bring a guilty verdict before the courts, then he has the right not to expend taxpayers' money in a case that will not take us anywhere. So we will trust that in his own deliberate judgment, he will make an assessment and decide how he goes further. But again, we must have the outside pressure. We must have the public call, the public cry to make sure it happens. So the more of us write letters to the editors, the more of us call into radio programs, the more of us speak on the matter in the public space, it brings the pressure down on these office holders to do the right thing. And if at the end of the day, the DPP comes and he says to Trinidad and Tobago, look, I have reviewed the documents, I have looked at the evidence, and I do not see a probable or possible guilty verdict. When this goes to court and I am closing this matter here, well, then we close it and we move forward. But until that time he does that, we have to raise the pressure on his office to say something on the matter. The Prime Minister has done, he feels that he's done his part. He has gotten a commission of inquiry. A report was laid in Parliament. It is out for public scrutiny and it has been passed on to the DPP. So perhaps the Prime Minister, in his own judgment as well, is thinking, look, let the DPP, digest what is before him. And when he makes a decision, then the Prime Minister may comment on the decision of the DPP. So we are waiting to see what happens from that perspective.
Now, we want to move to the realm of cybersecurity a bit. I know that the year 2023 has been termed negatively, of course, a year of cyber attacks for businesses in Trinidad and Tobago. In light of these attacks, how should the government invest in securing, especially government agencies, and enhancing our national cyber security?
So let's talk about cyber risk from two perspectives, right? You have targeted cyber attacks. So you hear about that on the news in foreign jurisdictions. You hear about, Iran having their cyber people trying to, get into nuclear facilities, to reactors and so on. A lot of it from the movies as well. You have what you call targeted attacks. Then you have what you call phishing, which starts with a P. And phishing is exactly what it says. You throw 100 lines and hopefully some fish bite and you end up, getting a victim in this whole issue of phishing. So what I've seen happening, let's take the TSTT incident. I cannot say whether the cyber attack on TSTT was deliberate. That somebody sitting in Russia somewhere decided, look, I go in and attack TSTT, this company in Trinidad and Tobago. We will capture their data and then we'll hold them for ransom and make sure they pay some money in digital currency so they can't trace it. And, we take them from there. I can't say that has occurred. what I can tell you happens normally. I'm an employee of a company. So I have, so for instance, my company is CTSL, Computer Technologies and Services Limited. My email address is rushton.paray@ctsl.net. Now, I like home design. I like architectural drawings. I do a lot of Lego. So you find, I will go online and I may find a website that tells me, look, sign up here and you'll get a magazine dealing with industrial designs, with architectural designs, 1-year membership free of charge. So I use my rushton.paray@ctsl.net email address to get access to this website, which is harmless. I mean, I am a hobbyist in that, and I will go and read that. But what these people do, they take your email addresses, your 10,000, 100,000, 500,000 email addresses, and they sell it. So the money that they make is by selling your email addresses. Now, legitimate people buy these email addresses, people who want to sell you products. You see all of them on a morning when you look at foreign television. You are being spammed with a lot of people from companies, selling their items. But then you have the nefarious people who would buy these email addresses. And what they will do, they will send a bulk mail. So everybody who, like Rushton Paray, who's interested in architectural design, gets an email from a company that is doing architectural design and say, look, would you like to see the latest trend in 2024? Click here. And when I click here, because I'm a hobbyist, I get 1 or 2 pictures, or I might get forwarded a link. But when I click on that link, spyware is downloaded into your computer. It can be a bot. Now, what a bot is, you have this beacon. So if you're familiar when you're on a plane and the plane is going to land at Piaco, the pilot looks for beacons to see where the plane has to land, where the runway is. So when you click here, you may download a photo, and embedded in the photo is the malware or the spy bot. So that sits on your computer. But listen, if you're in my corporate network, my CTSL network, and you do that, the bug lands in my corporate network, right? So this thing starts to send out a beacon, and the servers, the hackers, stay in the States or in the US or in Russia or in England, wherever they are. They connect you via a tunnel. So now these people don't know who CTSL is. They now have access into my network. So what they would do, they would scan, they will hack into the servers, they will get access into any database or whatever, and they would download the data. And all they have to do is change the admin password of your servers. Nobody can get in, and then they hold you to ransom. So the point that I want to make here to answer the question is that we must make people aware of digital behavior in a corporate network for state enterprise and corporate clients, and in your personal life, your digital behavior at home. Because we are at an era now where phishing it's an international syndicate. It's a crime syndicate. I mean, I'm sure many of you have gotten emails from some prince in Nigeria that has $500,000 for you from something somewhere, and you just have to send some money, and so that is part of phishing. You will get an email saying that, hey, you've won a lottery, for 500,000 US or for $1 million US. Click on this link to go forward. Now, you bet no lottery. Why are you getting a notification that I have won? So public awareness, to me, is one of the strategies that the state, you would have heard my last debate in Parliament. I raised that matter in terms of cybercrime, that the state must immediately launch a public awareness campaign for their employees of state enterprises, and then in the public space, launch public awareness. So if we make the citizens more aware of what phishing is, what you can expect, your behavior digitally when you're on a corporate network, then you would find the incidence of these phishing and cyber crime would reduce. I made that call 2 or 3 weeks ago. I've heard the state say nothing about it. I went ahead and I wrote CARICOM Impacts, which is the CARICOM agency that manages cybersecurity risk throughout the Caribbean islands. And I have asked them to join me in a cyber crime, a cyber awareness week in the Mayaro constituency sometime at the end of February. We're going to do a 3 or 4 day program. We're going to invite businesses. We're going to invite employees of state enterprises. We're going to invite school children. Each one would have a different lecture and provide examples and samples, and then how they must behave digitally as they move forward to reduce the incidents. Now, we've had a problem in Southwest Regional Health Authority with medical records. We still haven't gotten all the facts of that matter up to today. I think, the authority was hampered, stymied, even with patient assessments for a couple of weeks while they try to regain control of the systems. Now, again, no hacker in Russia is targeting anybody or any company here in Trinidad and Tobago. But it's just another phishing line. And whenever they poll and they hit something, they realize, hey, this is a telecom company, or this is an IT company, or this is a state enterprise in Trinidad and Tobago. Let me hold them for ransom a bit. So we need to have a big public awareness campaign to reduce the incidence of cyber phishing, of the cyber risk. So we get people more knowledgeable at the end of the day of what I call digital behavior as you carry about your business. And I mean, we're going into the 21st century. More and more things are going to be transiting towards a digital system, digital infrastructure. You've heard the Minister of Finance talk about digital currency. We're getting into the area. Jamaica is way ahead. Jamaica already has a digital currency in place. Barbados is talking about changing their laws. Eventually, Trinidad will have to play catch up. So we must raise the knowledge of our citizenry to deal with that.
Now, MP, I want to compliment you on engaging CARICOM, because I think I remember the debate, and what I appreciate is that he's not waiting on the government to do this. He took it up on his own accord as a member of parliament. Correct. Which is quite commendable. But as in your last line, you spoke about legislation, and I know that you are very forward-thinking representative. So do you see deficiencies in our national cybersecurity policies? And do we need a more robust cybercrime laws, or do we need cybercrime laws?
We have none. Listen, what we have, the closest thing to cybercrime laws in this country is something called the Computer Misuse Act of 2000, right? So you, Chris, as a student of UTT most recently, you went into UTT's network, you are a little IT genius, and you decided to be mischievous, and you are able to get into one of UTT's servers, and you can crash their database, be mischievous with your data. And they caught you. The police comes and charge you. You know what the fine is? About $200 enough for misbehavior. You could destroy millions of dollars worth of data in a company's corporate network today. And the legislation, which sits under the Computer Misuse Act of 2000, the fine is about $200 or $300. You get a slap on your wrist and you move on. We have had the cybercrime bill before this house since 2016, I think. It has gone to joint select committees back and forward. I think it died a natural death in the last parliament. It has not come before this 12th parliament as yet, because there was a lot of challenges. What the state had done, they went and they do a lot of cut and paste from other jurisdictions, and they brought the legislation to us here in Trinidad. Obviously, our stakeholders are the media, journalists, publishing houses, the IT companies. You have the internet service providers. All of these people are stakeholders, and they all had several concerns on parts of the legislation. even the cybercrime legislation came into conflict with the whistleblower legislation. So there were some issues that needed to be trashing out. That has died a natural death. We've heard nothing of the cybercrime bill in this parliament. Now, one of the things that we have been asking for, and I raised it in the parliament as well, was that of our signing the Budapest Convention. Now, the Budapest Convention is the global agreement on how we deal with cyber crimes worldwide. So it's like a standard, how we investigate, how we handle evidence, how we prosecute, how we work with our international partners in Interpol, Europol, wherever you have policing organizations all over the world. The Budapest Convention, as signatories, we would have access to that type of assistance in running down issues of cybercrime. Now, what happens in this country, and what has happened in several other pieces of international agreements we've signed. Now, we can sign an international agreement like the Budapest Convention, or the rights of the child in the United Nations, or some legislation on organized crime and trafficking. We can sign all of these things at the UN, at these global organizations. But to give it life, we must bring it into local law. We must give it life in local legislation. We have not done that. So, for instance, this is why we have no laws to deal with refugees in this country, right? We have signed on to all the UN laws on refugee and refugee status and what constitutes a refugee, but we have no local laws to deal with that. You would see lately the Attorney General, and even when Faris was Attorney General, they would hustle to bring some omnibus pieces of legislation interfering with 35, 40 pieces of local law to update something to line up with an international treaty that we've signed. And they do this hurriedly. So even we are participating in the Budapest Convention. We've been to some of the meetings, I understand. We've sat, we've participated. Unless we don't bring it into local law here in Trinidad and Tobago, our police has no teeth. Our investigative unit have no teeth. We are still governed by these public misbehavior in public office. These simple penalties for actions that could cost companies billions of dollars. And I want to bring it back to trade and industry. If we are asking, and I want to use an example, we have Hydrogen de France, which is currently in negotiation with the government of Trinidad and Tobago and a private sector operator. That Hydrogen de France is working with a private sector organization and the state to build a hydrogen plant, which is really one of the fuels of the future that Trinidad and Tobago must pursue in order to bring new revenue into the country. But take this for instance. If a company like Hydrogen de France is not happy with our HS&E regulation, if we will go back to Paria, with our handling and our management of incidents from a local perspective that could protect their investment, then they may think twice to invest their money here. If Hydrogen de France cannot protect its proprietary data when they come to build this plant in Trinidad and Tobago, what makes them the best operator in the world? They may have trade secrets that they may have to put into operation here in Trinidad and Tobago. But if our legislation doesn't protect them when they come here, then they may choose to go somewhere else. So this is why, these items, while we may talk about it, casually on the side of the road, in terms of health and safety, our cyber crime, people getting, hoodwinkled, into some of these schemes, but they have larger impacts in our trade and investment portfolio and how the rest of the world sees us. And if we have to be globally competitive, our local legislation must be tightened, it must be firm, and it must protect our investors when they come here. So our weak legislation in our environmental systems, our weak legislation in HS&E, our weak legislation. Now, one of the things that I didn't see the Paria report talk about was the fact that, and an incident happening on the workplace, after 2 years, you can't charge anybody. After 24 months, you cannot proffer a charge. Now, in the report, they've asked that OSHA be extended an additional 12 months to make it 3 years. So in the event OSHA has to lay any charges on anyone, they would have an additional 12 months. But that means that we in the parliament have to bring legislation to amend the act, and we have to do it now. We have to do it now to give OSHA an additional 12 months of legislative space that they can file a charge in the event of any negligence in breaking of their rules at the end of the day. But I have heard nothing from the state, heard nothing from the government. How are we going to deal with that particular recommendation? So when you look at cybercrime, if we don't fix the legislation, and Chris, as I said, the legislation is before us now. The power that the police has is under an act called the Computer Misuse Act of 2000. So sometimes some of the police officers themselves are not trained to understand even the language, the lingo. So what they do, they look for public mischief, public misdemeanor, as if you were to, pelt a stone on somebody's front glass and break it. The police charge you for public mischief and you pay back for the glass. That is what the police may pursue, because they too may not be okura with the language of even the 2000 Act. So there's a lot of work that has to be done with the cybercrime legislation before us. It has to be done legislatively, it has to be done with training of the police officers, and a huge public awareness campaign of digital behavior in corporate networks and in your private homes as well, to secure you and your money at the end of the day.
Well, MP, we want to thank you for joining us and, of course, providing us with your insights on these critical issues as we sought to navigate the complexities of the industrial safety industry and, of course, cyber security. Of course, your perspective sheds light on the path forward for Trinidad and Tobago. So we really, really want to thank you for taking time. I know that you have a very busy schedule, so to be here with us today live and discuss this, we're really, really grateful for that. And of course, to our viewers, stay engaged, stay informed. This is Critical Conversations, where we unpack the critical issues that shape our nation. Good night.